What's up, everybody? We're back with more spoiler talk, so let's go ahead and get into it. Over the last couple of days, we've had a ton of spoilers, and they're fantastic. Today, I'm going to focus on a handful that I think are really neat, so let's get started. And I'm going to get started with the ones that I think are going to be more competitively viable, going into the more janky brews. So, yeah. So I'm going to start off with Archdruid's Charm. This is a card with art that's very memeable. There's some really great stuff happening on Twitter about that if you're interested. But the card itself, instant for green, green, green. So you got to be in hard green in order to get access to this. But if you do, you're going to get that as early as turn 3. Or let's be real, it's green. You're going to be casting this on turn 2 off of a Land Royale for an Elvish Mystic. In any event, you get these options. Choose one. Search your library for a creature or land card and reveal it. Put it out of the battlefield tapped if it's a land card. Otherwise, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Second option, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control. Or exile target artifact or enchantment. Now, when we're analyzing a charm, what we really want to find is what is the one mode that I'm going to use most often. 90% of the time, that is there a removal mode? Or is there some kind of card draw mode? These are all just kind of the basic, like if all else fails, we got that going for us. The thing about this card is, all 3 modes are that mode. Number 1 is a card draw selection mode. But on top of that, it's a Sylvan Scrying that can go directly to the battlefield. Are you freaking kidding me? But then on top of that, it also can put a creature in your hand in the late game if mana's not your jam, or if you're not playing a lands matter deck. At instant speed for 3 mana, that I don't have words to describe how absolutely insane that is. We're in situations where in older formats, you're going to be able to instant speed, tutor up a Bajuka Bog, ramp yourself, and blow out your opponent's graveyard after they've attacked with their Dragon Reach Channelers, or as they're trying to do the reanimation shenanigans. As a reanimator player, thanks, I hate it. But as a sneak attack player, oh my goodness, thank you. So we're in kind of like both those realms here. Chapter 1 alone is worth the price of admission. If the rest of this text didn't exist, I'm already on board. Because you'll notice it doesn't say basic. Creature or land card. And reveal it. I love this. I just have no other words. If every landfall strategy wants this. Every prime time Maze's End or Field of the Dead deck wants this. That effect it's phenomenal. I have no other words. Next mode. Put a counter on a creature you control and it deals, and then it bites something, and it can hit. It only goes after creatures that you don't control. So okay, but Rabid Bite at instant speed for 3 mana, and you get a counter out of the deal. Like that's fine. Like in draft, that's going to be great to have access to. If you've got the biggest creature online, just get rid of a pesky blocker, keep moving, or pick off the opponent's challenging combo piece, whatever the case may be. Just great. And then being able to exile an artifact or enchantment. That's a nice Ley Line Binding you got there. I want my thing back. Yeah, that seems really good. Honestly, chapter 1, 2, and 3 are all fantastic. The only problem with this in standard right now is we need to be going heavy, heavy, heavy green in order to take advantage of this. But as long as we still have the tri-lands, and, we have decks like the Domain deck proving you can be 5 colors in standard right now with a minimal issue. And that deck was heavy green to begin with, so okay, fine. We now have this into the mix. I don't know that deck necessarily wants it, given these modes and given what that deck already does well. But you get the idea. It's not going to be hard. Our mana bases are all fantastic right now. So the triple green in Constructed is nowhere near the obstacle that, that it might look like at first. So I think this card is phenomenal. Full stop. Next up, another card that I think is really freaking good. Connecting the Dots. This is an enchantment for 1 and a red. Whenever a creature you control attacks, exile the top card of your library face down. Then you can pay 1 and a red, discard your hand, sacrifice Connecting the Dots, put all cards exiled with Connecting the Dots into their owner's hands. If this looks familiar, it's because this is Bomat Courier, effectively. So what you're doing here, every time, whenever a creature you control attacks. So if you are attacking with a creature, and the other thing is here, it doesn't say whenever you attack. It's whenever a creature attacks. So if you attack with multiple creatures, unless I'm mistaken, this is going to trigger multiple times, one for each creature. So you have this opportunity to just stockpile these face-down cards. You don't get to look at them. You have no idea what they are. But by turn 3 or 4, this could easily be, you could easily have 5 or 6 cards down under here. And then you can pay 2. You have to discard your hand, which is allegedly a cost. But in red, your hand's going to be empty by turn 4 or 5 anyway, right? In most aggressive red decks, I should say. So that's a minimal cost. But then you get to just draw all the cards that you picked up. So in aggressive red strategies, this is fantastic. The one downside, that is a very real downside that I think a lot of people are going to overlook when they're analyzing this card. In mono red, you have to spend 2 mana and get 0 damage out of it. And then on top of that, in order to get payoffs later, you need to spend another 2 mana. We're talking about 4 mana over the course of 2 separate turns, but over the course of the game, and all you do is refill your hand. Now, granted, you're refilling your hand with a whole bunch of stuff that's going to do more damage and give you more reach into the late game. So right now, Mono Red is a very, very powerful deck in Standard that is able to grind because of cards like Urabrask's Forge and Godric and some of these other like bigger, chunky powerhouse cards. Adding Connecting the Dots to the mix all of a sudden makes those aggressive red decks even grindier. Now, I don't know if we're going to see... I don't know if this is going to make the cut, but I think it's very interesting, and it might easily be a sideboard option for those builds. So I'm intrigued by it. You know, best case scenario, you have a 1-drop haster like a Monastery Swiftspear. Oh, being an enchantment, it also triggers prowess, so that's pretty nice. But yeah, so it's mana for no damage, but for eventual cards. You really want to be gearing up for the late game in red. So it is a weird one, but I think the potential is absolutely there. If you're doing any kind of aggressive deck in Commander that has red in it, this is great, but that's, I mean, it's a way of getting card advantage late into the game in Commander. Also, if you want to fill your graveyard, the fact that you discard your hand, you might be able to take advantage of that in neat ways. I know I've done that with cards like Ox of Agonis or even the Ogrehead Helm. Some of these cards where you sacrifice them to discard your hand, then draw a handful of cards. This is just doing that. So if you like that effect, cool. Here's another way to do it, and a very efficient way to do it. All right, next up. This is a card that has me very, very excited, very, very intrigued, and I also can't help but roll my eyes at it a little bit. Escape Tunnel. This is a land, and I know what a lot of people are saying. A lot of people are looking at this and going, wait, they power crept Evolving Wilds or power crept Terramorphic Expanse? And to that I would ask, when was the last time Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds were actually relevant as far as like constructed play is concerned? In Limited, they serve a viable function, but even then you're not excited about them. They've never been like big marquee cards. Actually, you know what? I'll tell you the last time Evolving Wilds was relevant and constructed. It was back when Omnath Locus of Creation was the 4-mana one. I think that's Locus of Creation if I remember correctly. Back when that was legal in Standard, there was a deck running 4 Fabled Passages and it ran 2 Evolving Wilds because getting additional land drops was so critical. Well, the problem is if you're going into older formats where cards like Omnath and these landfall strategies want to be getting 2, 3, 4 land drops a turn, where these kind of fetch lands are good, you have actual fetch lands. So all of a sudden, like, Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds still aren't relevant. The only thing that's good about Terramorphic and Evolving Wilds is the way that I use them, which is as super budget Commander mana-based fixers, you know, because I already have dozens of them. And so, anyway, Escape Tunnel, I'm soapboxing a little bit even before getting into the card text. I apologize for that. Escape Tunnel is just a power crept Evolving Wilds. It is an untapped land that you can tap, sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. It just is Evolving Wilds. But it has this extra ability, too, where you can tap, sacrifice it, target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. So it is a strictly better Evolving Wilds. And that mode on it of being able to give something unblockable is very relevant in decks that care about, you know, any kind of deck or any kind of synergy where a particular creature wants to connect. We talked about the Pride of Hulklade earlier on this channel. If you want to take a look at that, I highly recommend you go back and watch that video. I gave it its own video because of how much I love that card. But Pride of Hulklade is a great example of a creature with power 2, but toughness 15, and when it deals damage to a player, you draw cards equal to its toughness. Now, in that case, you have to pay 4 mana to prevent it from having Defender, or give it the ability to attack despite the fact that it has Defender, and it does buff its power. But as long as you escape tunnel it first before you activate that, it doesn't matter. The thing's still unblockable till end of turn. So, but then when it connects, it'll allow you to draw 15 cards. That's the reason I mentioned that. It has this damage trigger, or can get this damage trigger that would be absolutely absurd. And so Escape Tunnel synergizes with that. And it basically just costs a land drop. That's it. You know, anytime you're getting an effect that is worth mana, in this case, giving something unblockable. You know, we've seen Rogue's Passage and some other cards. We also see this effect on cantrips. I believe Slip Through is one where it costs 1 blue, and it can give a creature unblockable, and then you can even draw a card in that case. So this effect is worth a mana or so, and now instead of, you know, actually paying mana for it, we're just using one of our land drops. I think this is a cool design. I like the card. And I hope it gets reprinted into the ground, because I think there are a whole bunch of casual Commander players who are going to want to put this into their 3-4 color decks that care about getting in chip damage with individual creatures, or they're doing like the Arcades Big Butts thing where their power is super duper low, but they're hitting like a truck anyway. Being able to give unblockable on those kind of creatures is good. So this effect is strong, but not great, but you're getting it effectively for free. Well, the other downside in deck building, though, is that this is going to have a land come in tapped when you activate it to actually try to hit your spells on curve. So it's weird. It's actually, now that I think about it, it's weird because the aggressive decks that have the cheap things that you want to give unblockable to are also the ones who really, like often anyway, don't want their lands coming in tapped in the early game. And so the fact that this card kind of synergizes, I don't know, that cost is actually pretty significant. So I'm expecting this to be a Commander staple in the not too distant future, in the way that Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds are right now for budget casual players. That's what I'm expecting with this. It's neat. It's fine. If you happen to open one, it can easily swap in. You can literally take any deck right now that you have in any format, I'm assuming it's Commander, that has an Evolving Wilds in it or a Terramorphic Expanse in it. You can slot this in for additional value that maybe you never need, but you never know. Crazy things can happen. So yeah, interesting design. All right, next up, this card is one I'm incredibly excited about. People who've been following me on various socials know that I love fight rigging, and I love any excuse to use fight rigging. I also love Ilharg the Razeboar, and I'm gonna bring that around in a second. We have Anzrag, the Quake Mole. This is an 8/4 mole god for 2 red-green. Now, if you're like me, when you first hear those stats, you would just assume, oh, there's going to be some kind of downside. You know, they're giving us 8 power on a 4-drop. It has to have some kind of a downside. That way, it kind of balances, because otherwise, holy cow, that's an obscene amount of power. Well, here's the text box. Whenever Anzrag the Quake Mole becomes blocked, untap each creature you control. After this combat phase, there is an additional combat phase, and it has an activated ability, 3 red, green, green. Anzrag must be blocked each combat this turn, if able. So, if you have 7 mana lying around, this thing all of a sudden gets a lure effect, and you can attack indefinitely, basically until this thing dies. So, they have to put enough blockers in front of it to kill it. Now, its toughness is only 4. So that's not terrible. But if you have any way of giving this thing indestructible, any way of, you know, heaven forbid your opponent has like a 0 toughness or a 0 power blocker or an indestructible blocker, if both things are indestructible somehow, the amount of ridiculousness that can happen here. Or if they have a creature that has protection from red or green, you know, Anzrag's damage is going to be prevented. Well, unless you give it trample, in which case all the damage will trample through the face. I don't know. You can end up in a scenario where you're just getting infinite combats and infinite punches, which that's just a combo kill effectively. And it's kind of all contained on this one card. I don't know. Obviously, you can support it in some neat ways. The reason that I mentioned fight rigging is because this is an 8 power 4-drop. You fight rigging on 3 into this on 4, you're off to the races. If the thing you cast off fight rigging is a way to give this thing haste or, you know, anything else, you can imagine that getting absolutely out of hand very, very fast. Downsides. We need to talk about downsides, because as a janky brewer, I adore this card. It also really illustrates, in the last set, we had a 7/7 for 2, for goodness sake. So this is going to be kind of me harping on something that's well established at this point. Stats are worth almost nothing as far as your mana cost is concerned if a card costs more than 3. We've seen that time and time again. The moment they could print a 10/10 for 4. Actually, Gigantosaurus is a 10/10 for 5. And that's an old design that sucked then. We clearly have a situation where the power toughness variable is no longer meaningful once you get to the higher points in the curve, because interaction is so good and often doesn't key off of power toughness. So when we get to 4 mana, they're willing to give us 8 power and they don't freaking care. It doesn't even matter. And the reality is, this thing dies to Leyline Binding. There used to be a time when whenever we're analyzing standard cards, does it die to Cut Down? Now it's like, does it die to Leyline Binding? You mean, is it a permanent? Yes, it is. As long as it's not a land as well, it just gets removed by Leyline Binding, and that's just the state we live in. If that's the case, it's probably not going to be good. Does it die to Sunfall? Absolutely. Any creature right now into the late game is going to be facing an uphill battle, and it's going to be incredibly hostile. So what we need to do with this card is put it in a deck where every other creature in the deck needs to be answered. That seems to be the only answer. You either have to go all threats or all answers. That just seems to be the way it works now. And now that all of our answers are also the kill spells, in the case of things like Sunfall or the Unstable Glyph Bridge, we can get away with it. Or Wandering Emperor, that's another one. It's removal, but it's the win con. In any event, this goes into those kinds of decks where you just go hard early. The other thing that I really do want to see with this, though, is some kind of instant speed fling effect. We don't have any particularly good flings in Standard right now other than Burn Together, which is the adventure on the Callous Sellsword, which is sorcery speed. That's really unfortunate. We also have Ziatora, but that's at the end step, and it's on a 6-drop creature. So all the same problems can, exist already going into this. So I don't think Anzrag the Quake Mole is going to see much play in competitive Standard. I do think a lot of jank brewers are going to do some insane, beautiful nonsense with this, though, and I can't wait. And I'm going to be amongst you trying to make this thing work, because I think this card is great. It has a lot of cool use cases, ways of generating infinite combats, ways to, create obscene amounts of damage. And even if you're not doing any crazy combos, this is an 8/4 that your opponent will not want to block. This is basically an 8/4 unblockable if you don't do anything to it. That seems good to me. All right. Oh, and the reason I mentioned Ilharg the Razeboar, Gruul, they actually have these animalistic gods, right? And Ilharg was the previous one. If you go back to War of the Spark, there's a whole cycle. Every color got a god. All of them were the god Eternals from Amonkhet that had been turned into zombies by Nicol Bolas, except Red. Red got Ilharg the Razeboar, who was just the Gruul god. Just the dude they worshipped was just like, hey, Big Pig, come help us out. And he just showed up and was just kind of bopping around for a minute. No idea why they were able to do that. And now Anzrag, apparently they have another animalistic god that has become corporeal in some way. And here we have it, folks. So I gotta say, Gruul, they get it. They clearly have the one true religion. I am terribly sorry, my Christian upbringing, but here we are. All hail Anzrag, the Quake Mole. All right, speaking of other fun janky cards that I'm going to be doing a lot of dumb stuff with, we have Doppelgang. This is a sorcery for XXX green blue. For each of X target permanents, create X tokens that are copies of that permanent. This is a card that, depending on how hard you are ramping, is either stone unplayable and absolute trash, or the best card in your deck. It is one of those two. Because the floor on this thing, if X equals 1, you still have to pay 5 frickin' mana. And you get one copy of one thing. That's fine, I guess. If you have 8 mana at your disposal and are able to pay where X equals 2, which is kind of the sweet spot, consider putting this in a deck if you can get to 8 mana. If you cannot get to 8 mana, don't even consider this. Not worth the price of admission. Use C double, you'll be much happier. But if you can get to 8, all of a sudden X can equal 2, and you create 2 copies of 2 target permanents. So what you're doing is you're copying 2 separate things, and you're getting a total of 4 permanents on the battlefield for a single card. And they're multiple copies of the same things. So if you're copying something with an end of the battlefield trigger, go crazy. The legend rule does apply to your copies, so be aware of that. So if you copy your opponent's Atraxa 3 times or whatever, because you've ramped to the moon and back, you'll get 3 separate ETBs, but you only get 1 Atraxa token left at the end of the day. So be aware of that. Also, it can target lands, which is pretty notable. So if you are already ramping like crazy, you can ramp a whole bunch more, which is just pretty cool. And yeah, and it can target your opponent's stuff. You can target your stuff. Your opponent's leyline binding. If you do an X equals 2 or X equals 3, the leyline binding can be one of those targets. Now all of a sudden, you can get a whole bunch on your side of the field. One of the best things about this, I would say, is being able to copy your opponent's leyline binding and get multiple copies of that leyline binding in play, exiling a whole bunch of their permanents, including the other leyline binding that had something of yours under it. So all in all, I gotta say, I keep bringing up leyline binding because that card is so critical to so many decks in Standard right now, mainly the Domain deck. But it's a very popular piece that I even see in Timeless. So having answers for it is great. And we also have this situation where if you have permanents that care about that are good in multiples or can do crazy things, then this is an awesome way as like a one-of to just really go hard. In those situations, this becomes win more very hard, but it opens itself up to creative gameplay, and that's what I love. So this is definitely a Commander Simic BS staple for me. Like right away, I'm gonna definitely want to get my hands on 1 or 2 of these for various like Simic and Simic adjacent Commander decks that I have. We're making a whole bunch of copies of stuff. Is possible, but you got to be ramping to the moon. Because, okay, so we talked about, so it costs 5, then it costs 8. If you want X to equal 3, you need to get to 11, which granted in a casual Commander pod, you could totally do. But outside of that, you probably can't. Yeah, great stuff. Ooh, maybe use this with Awake in the Woods. More to come on that later. Next up, we have a card that I anticipate is going to be the most expensive common from the set. I don't know if this is going to impact Pauper or not, but it has some text on it that we know is going to drive prices up. Slime Against Humanity. This is a sorcery for 2 and a green. Create a 0/0 green ooze creature token with trample. Put X +1/+1 counters on it where X is 2, plus the total number of cards you own in exile and in your graveyard that are oozes or are named Slime Against Humanity. A deck can have any number of cards named Slime Against Humanity. So this is up there with Dragon's Approach, the Shadowborn Apostles, all those cards that we know where you can have any number of them. This is the next one in the mix. And I kind of love that it's an ooze support card, because we have cards like Eve, Progenitor Ooze. We also have, there's the Biogetic Ooze and a couple of other oozes that are just fun, and they're neat cards that have cool interactions, and they support other oozes in many cases. But we don't really have a critical mass of them to the point where making a good, like, ooze commander deck is really viable. So the idea of just put in 20 of these and you're going to be fine. You can do that and it sees other oozes, not just other copies of Slime Against Humanity. So also the name. Can we just appreciate the pun value? It's like, nice one, Dad. Oh, you love to see it. So I honestly think Slime Against Humanity is just a strong card. I mean, the minimum here is it creates a 3/3. Because when it comes in, I believe it sees itself. And so it creates this 3/3 ooze. Also, if you can do any kind of storm nonsense where you can copy this on the stack, you have the added benefit of creating way more tokens than you would otherwise. It also combos nicely with cards. Actually, I mean, this with Doubling Season, it would also be insane because you would double the counters that are coming onto it as well as the number of tokens that it's generating each time. So, I don't know. I feel like this card is going to see a lot of play in a lot of decks, and especially in Commander. In Commander, this card is going to be all over the place. Just get used to it. It's going to become the new thing. And yay, oozes. I'm not mad. I always love seeing good ooze support, and I think this is a good ooze support card. You know, it's a sorcery instead of a creature, but it generates a creature. Okay. I think it's neat. All right, next up, we have a card that every single Reanimator deck and every single Aristocrat deck of all time ever is going to need. This is one of those where, like, you might want to pick this one up right after the set comes out, because I think, okay, I'm not a financial guru by any means, but this card has the text that makes me go, And if you like Massacre Worm, oh, baby, we got a good deal for you. So this is Vein Ripper. This is a 6/5 flying vampire assassin for 3 black. With Ward, sacrifice a creature. Whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life. I'm pausing for dramatic effect because there is text that's not on this card. It does not say this ability only triggers once each turn. So go crazy. This is a Super Zulaport, or Super Blood Artist. The Super Blood Artist is what we're looking at here, because it pings for 2 each time. You do gain life, and it's whenever any other creature dies. So as you can see, if your opponent tries to target it with a removal spell, they have to sacrifice a creature, otherwise the removal spell gets countered. But the moment they do, it triggers Vein Ripper, so at the very least, you can smack them back for 2 just by trying to touch your stuff. If you have instant speed sacrifice outlets like Bartolome del Presidio or any other classic Nantuko Husk, Carrion Feeder. That's the one I was thinking of. Carrion Feeder, Viscera Seer, any of that jazz. You get any kind of sacrifice action going where you want your creatures to be dying anyway for value. All of a sudden, this thing pops off like crazy and could easily machine gun kill your opponents. In Commander, this is another version of, like, I don't know about anybody else out there, but I know all my Aristocrats decks, the moment Sir Conrad came out, they just became Sir Conrad shells. They just did. And at the end of the day, if you have that effect and the ability to dome people when things die, that's critical. Now, in the case of a lot of those effects, they hit each of your opponents. This one is a target. So unless you're going infinite, you can't kill an entire pod with this. So just make sure, I don't know, read the vibe. If you need to use this to take out a threat, you can. If you want to spread the damage and just use it to, be the threat for, in a game of Commander, do it. The other side is, it's a 6/5 flyer for 6. This might see play in other formats. I mean, in Standard, this is going to be tough to deal with because of the ward. So it's going to become a challenge for control players to play against, unless they're running Void Rend. That's a clean answer. Or if they counter it on the stack, which obviously plenty of folks can do. Or they just Sunfall the next turn. That's also a thing. So anyway, I think this card is just great. It's really just kind of the bottom line. And I wouldn't be surprised if it sees play all over the place. But in Commander, it's going to be absolutely insane. That effect is insane. All right, next up, we have a card called Undergrowth Recon. Now, I wanted to talk about this one because it's getting a lot of play on social media right now. A lot of people are talking about it. This artwork by Ryan Pancost is beautiful, and it was used as a lot of the marketing material for Murders of Karlov Manor, because it's somebody using like a steampunk crystal camera, apparently. It's definitely what it looks like, or how the person's holding it makes it very much look like a camera. And in any event, what is this thing? It's an enchantment for 1 green. It's a mythic. At the beginning of your upkeep, return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. That's it. That's all it does. So I fully believe this card is going to be kind of this is going to be a dud pull for most, most packs open. This is one of those where, like, oh, I got a mythic. Oh, it was this one. I don't think this card is particularly strong in most decks. A lot of the stuff that we've looked at today is good in certain scenarios, like, where it's just generically good. We have plenty of decks where they fit best, or plenty of cards where they fit best in certain archetypes, certain strategies, but you can put them wherever and it's going to be fine. In the case of this, if you are not sacrificing lands repeatedly for value, this kind of sucks, is really the bottom line. So yeah, if you have a Gitrog Commander deck, that's going to be sacrificing lands constantly, this gets you effectively an additional land drop every turn. That's nice. Like, there's nothing wrong with that by any means. So, okay, it's decent value. But if you're not sacrificing lands regularly, if you aren't using lands that force sacrifices, like, well, our escape tunnel that we were looking at earlier, or cards like Wasteland, Strip Mine, those kind of things. Obviously, if you're doing that, get crazy with this, add Spelunking to the mix, and you're going to have a good day. But aside from that, I think in general, this card is kind of weak. You know, this is one of those where if you open it in your seal pool, I would highly recommend. Unless you open like 3 escape tunnels, don't even bother. I don't think this is going to do much for you at all. In fact, it's going to be a dead card 90% of the time. So yeah, in commander decks where you have some synergies, neat. Unless, of course, you know, we haven't seen the whole set yet. Maybe there are other major like land sacrifice payoffs, in which case, okay, cool. Having some more options there is good. That said, there is another card in the set that fits in a lot of these same decks that is honestly significantly better. Significantly better. I cannot say in words just how much better it is. So let's get to it. Aftermath Analyst. And this is an uncommon elf detective for 2. 1 under green. For a 1/3. When Aftermath Analyst enters the battlefield, mill 3 cards. That's whatever. If you do graveyard stuff, you know about the mill dork. That's not a new thing. But there's this activated ability. 3 into green. Sacrifice Aftermath Analyst. Return all land cards from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. You can activate that at instant speed. You can activate that in response to blocks, whatever. If you're putting lands in your graveyard, this gets them all back at once. This is Splendid Reclamation on a body. If you've ever been running things like Splendid Reclamation, you combine that, you combine Scape Shift with Splendid Rec, you're going to have a good day. Also, there are plenty of cards right now in Standard that care about lands coming and going from the graveyard. We have Slogurk the Overslime. We have the Titania Meld from Brothers War, who's kind of meh, but it's out there. The synergies are here. There are plenty of cards that care about cards in graveyards. And so, the whole descent mechanic from Lost Caverns of Ixalan really encourages people to mill aggressively. Well, when you're milling aggressively, you're putting a whole bunch of lands in your graveyard. If you can't use the lands in your graveyard, having an option on just a body that can block for you decently to begin with, I mean, this thing gets you coming and going. When it drops, it mills 3. If you're in a Descend shell that cares about milling, great, you have access to that. Once you get to 4 mana, you can then also just crack this, and this could ramp you 5, 6, 10 lands. I mean, depending on how aggressively you milled and if your opponent's going after your graveyard or not. But if all goes well, this could take you from turn 4 to all of a sudden turn 8 or 9. I mean, if you want a way to ramp and, tee up things like Doppelgang, like we were talking about earlier, if you're milling, if your deck cares about mill for other purposes, this absolutely gives it to you. So I love this card. Like, period. The other thing that's amazing is the fact that it's a creature, and a 2-drop creature at that. So in these mill strategies, it's not uncommon to also have cards that allow you to reanimate. And if you're reanimating small creatures, those cards are really, really cheap. You have a Helping Hand, you have Cosmic Rebirth, you have Recommission, you have No One Left Behind. In older formats, you have Luris, which all of a sudden this can bring, this can come back from that. So all in all, I think this card is nothing short of fantastic, and it can just do the thing. I know my pet commander deck is an Abzan Reanimator Shell, and I usually end up with a whole bunch of lands in my graveyard that I can't use. Well, all of a sudden, and I haven't been willing to put in Splendid Reclamation into the deck because it's using up a slot for something that could be a reanimation spell that could get a creature back, and that's the goal. That's what the deck does. But this, all of a sudden, being one of the mill dorks, like I could take Mire Triton out or Undead Butler out and put this in and feel very good about that exchange. So all in all, I could even take Old Rutstein out for this. Honestly, it's that good. I think this card is great. And so it's kind of funny to look at Undergrowth Recon as the mythic that fits in the same shell, and it's very meh, very milquetoast, and I'm unimpressed. But then this uncommon has me completely gobsmacked. I love it. All right, next up. We're going to be looking at Blood Spatter Analysis. I'm going to be calling this thing Blood Splatter Analysis a lot, but it's Spatter. We need to make sure that we're talking about something dignified. Excuse me, this is blood spatter, not splatter. Ugh, we're not splattering blood here, thank you. So this is an enchantment for black-red. When Blood Spatter Analysis enters the battlefield, it deals 3 damage to target creature an opponent controls. Lightning Strike on a creature as the base. Okay, not bad. Whenever one or more creatures die, mill a card and put a Bloodstain counter on Blood Spatter Analysis. Then sacrifice it if it has 5 or more Bloodstain counters on it. When you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So the payoff here is pretty lackluster. When you see cards that like represent a sequence like this, they're built in a couple of different ways. Sometimes the value is front-loaded, sometimes it's on the back end. In this case, the value is front-loaded, and actually, I'm willing to say that it's kind of, the middle part here is actually pretty relevant as well. I think the mill is the most important part of this. The floor on this is 3 damage to a thing for 2. It's a decent removal spell. Okay, great. But as creatures are dying, you're also milling cards. That, I think, is very valuable in certain shells. So Jund Reanimator, so all of a sudden, if there's a Jund Reanimator deck that can take advantage of these land payoffs we were talking about, then all of a sudden, this would fit in that nicely. Any kind of Aristocrat shell where you're going to be sacrificing creatures regularly, or even controlling decks that are going to be destroying, blowing up creatures frequently that benefit from filling your graveyard. Cards, if anything cares about, like, Detect Evidence, Delve, any of that jazz, that all helps fuel that. And it can, of course, put reanimation targets into your yard, which is, it's cool by me. I'm a fan. So yeah, I feel like that's actually not bad. This card is kind of unimpressive. I think it's going to go under a lot of radars, but I think there are going to be plenty of games where when you look back on it, realizing this card removed a key threat, like a Lord Skidder or something, or a Graveyard Trespasser, and it allowed you to fill your graveyard as the game progressed, just throughout the normal course of the game. As creatures are dying, you're milling cards. And eventually, you get to effectively the Raise Dead effect is not bad. Being able to simply pull a creature back and... if this said draw a card as the last mode there, I wouldn't be mad at it. And let's be honest, in most cases, that's going to be what this is. You get to pick a creature from your graveyard and just put it back into your hand. Okay, cool. You just drew a creature and you had some control over it. That's pretty solid. So I think for 2 mana, I don't know what else you need. It does all the things. I kind of like this. I'm not going to lie. And I also really do enjoy Rakdos on, Rakdos and Gruul on Ravnica's Good Times. Which is funny because I identify with Golgari a lot too. I don't know, Jund rules. It just is what it is. All right, next up, we have Lazav, Wearer of Faces. That's just yucky right there. I guess we're all kind of, if you think about it, if you get metaphysical with it, we're all really just wearing our faces. I'm going to be done with that right now. But anyway, Lazav, Wearer of Faces. He's wearing other people's faces. That's the important detail that makes it skeezy. So we get a 2/3 for blue-black. Whenever Lazav, Wearer of Faces, attacks, exile target card from a graveyard, then investigate. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, you may have Lazav become a copy of a creature card exiled with it until end of turn. So this is another cool design. We've seen a couple of these recently. We saw it with the new Kaya as well, where it's a reanimation effect, kind of. In this case, though, you're having to exile the creature from the graveyard. So if you have big creatures in your deck, exiling them to this is risky, because if this gets removed, which, it's a 2/3 for 2, it's pretty soft to just about any removal in the game right now. Because we don't have Doomblade in Standard. Doesn't have a Doomblade. That's about it, though. But, if you exile your own creatures out of your graveyard, you are denying yourself that resource for later. Any reanimation spell can't touch him now. So that's a bit of a bummer. But if you're removing your opponent's creatures from their graveyards, which right now a lot of people are playing very large, very scary creatures. So yeah, if you're able to remove your opponent's Sheoldred the Apocalypse, or if you're able to remove your opponent's Atraxa, you don't get any value from them entering, in the case of like Atraxa and Atali, but you do upgrade your 2-drop into like a 7/7 with a whole mess of keywords. That's still worth the price of admission, because that price of admission is sacrificing a clue. And that costs 2 mana, assuming that you do it the hard way, where you actually just activate the clue. However, there are plenty of other situations. Like if you have the new Kellen, for example, it just lets you sacrifice clues or destroy clues. Or no, that one is destroy, so never mind, it wouldn't trigger this. But you also have Bartolome, which can sacrifice artifacts that, or the Oni Cult Anvil, they can sacrifice artifacts at instant speed. As long as that artifact's a clue, it triggers all these things. So it's not hard to get free value off of this. And the other cool thing that's great, so it attacks, you exile a card from a graveyard, and then you get the clue. If you have the mana or some other means to sacrifice that clue, while attacking, Lazav can just magically become the thing, whatever that thing is. So in Commander, what I would highly recommend is doing this alongside Phage the Untouchable. So dig this, all right? Phage the Untouchable is a card that says when it enters the battlefield, if you didn't cast it, you lose the game. But whenever she deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. What you can do with Lazav is as a 2/3, you can attack. You can actually crack your escape tunnel to make Lazav unblockable. Lazav can then attack, exile the Phage out of your graveyard. You pay 2, it becomes Phage. It was already on the battlefield, so the ETB that would kill you doesn't trigger, and now you have an unblockable Phage barreling into somebody's face. Things like that are possible with this. That's really fun. So if you're clever about how you synergize it and how you line it up, you can do some crazy things with this. And I want to see some goofy Commander nonsense with Lazav Wearer of Faces. Now, this isn't the first time that we've seen a Lazav that functions similarly to this. The benefit here, though, is you're investigating with each attack. By doing that, you're getting card draw and artifacts onto the battlefield. So anything that cares about clue tokens, you get those as well as the normal Lazav nonsense. So I love it. I absolutely love that. Also, I'm noticing that the ability there, whenever you sacrifice a clue, you may have Lazav become a copy of a creature card exiled with it until end of turn. So all of the cards that you have exiled with Lazav's attack trigger are fair game. So in a game of Commander, if you remove one opponent with that Phage trick, I mean, you'll need something to get the unblockable back, or some other way to make Lazav unblockable, of which there are tons of ways to do that. And then all of a sudden, you still have Phage under Lazav unless it gets removed. And so you can continually do this, over and over. This is great. I love this card. It is, Lazav is one of my favorite characters just in general. His cards always have these kind of cool, unique abilities and ways to leverage graveyards that I really appreciate. So yeah, it's hating on graveyards while you're doing all the other stuff. Yeah, and actually, even in Standard, I wouldn't be surprised if this sees some play. I mean, we see Dennick, the Pious Apprentice, see a lot of play just by virtue of being a decent statted lifelinker at 2. Yeah, there's the ability to disturb it from the graveyard, so it has upside beyond just being a decent body on 2, but honestly, just being a decent body on 2 is enough to merit play. And the same thing is true with the Stitcher from Innistrad, whose name's escaping me right now. We've seen a lot of these where just a good 2/3 for 2 legendary dual color creature steps in and just becomes one of the guys. And I can see Lazav doing that for certain archetypes. I like him. All right, next up, we have Trostani, 3 Whispers. So this is the Dryad leader of the Selesnya Guild. We have a 4/4 for 3, and it's a green, white, and a hybrid Selesnya are the options. So either 2 green and a white or 2 white and a green. And we have 3 activated abilities, no other keywords. 1 in a green, target creature gains Death Touch until end of turn. A hybrid Selesnya, target creature gains Vigilance until end of turn. Or 2 in a white, target creature gains Double Strike until end of turn. This is just a Swiss Army knife on a legendary creature, and I kind of love that. If you're in Selesnya colors, you do get a 4/4 for 3 with just some additional threat of activation upsides. The thing I also love about this, Death Touch, Vigilance, and Double Strike are all very combat relevant effects. Late in the game, when you have a lot of mana lying around and you go to attacks, you have all of these in your back pocket. They're all readily available. So you get to choose. Vigilance is the only one that you're going to have to do before attackers if it's going to be relevant. But as far as Death Touch and Double Strike go, there's nothing stopping you from giving that to one creature. If they put a very, very large, blocker in front of a meaningful attacker of yours, you can just say, you know what, I'm going to spend 5 mana one of them's green, one of them's white. This creature now has Death Touch and Double Strike. If that's a trampler to begin with, all of a sudden you've now doubled its power effectively. And by giving it Death Touch, you're able to assign 1 damage to the defender and the rest, including the normal, the regular strike damage, all through to the opponent. So honestly, I think this in a deck with a lot of trampling creatures has an opportunity to be very, very strong. I like that. But it's fair. We're looking at a creature that can be easily removed, and it costs a lot of mana in order to get really powerful effects. But if you have the mana, if you've ramped hard and you have big creatures and you're trying to do that like in the trenches slugfest that you can do with these colors, this card can complement that strategy very, very nicely and put your opponent in a position where they really need to have a sweeper, or you're probably gonna get there. So I like it. I think this is a cool design. That said, I don't think it's going to see much play in Standard because those very aggressive kind of green and white decks tend to go low to the ground and more tempo these days because they have to deal with so much removal and so many powerful sweepers. So I think this fits in an awkward spot. Any creature that's in 3 to 5 mana in that range, and it's a setup piece for some kind of late game strategy, those cards are all really tough to make work in the current Standard environment. But in Commander, this card's great. And I think a lot of maybe newer players or a lot of just big old Timmies at heart are going to love this in Commander. What's not to love? All right, and the last card that I want to talk about today is Vannifar, Evolved Enigma. This is an Elf Ooze Wizard. So hey, if you were wondering what deck to put that Slime Against Humanity in, we have an Ooze, so maybe there's something here. So Vannifar here is a 3/4 for 2 green blue. At the beginning of a combat on your turn, choose 1. Cloak a card from your hand. And what that is you're taking that card from your hand, putting it onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature with Ward 2. And then you can turn it face up for its, if it's a creature card, for its mana cost. That it's basically, that becomes its disguise cost. Or you put a +1/+1 counter on each colorless creature you control. So this card is honestly kind of weird. I think the joke here is that you're supposed to play with a whole bunch of like disguise creatures and a whole bunch of morph creatures, because when they're face down, they are colorless. And so if you have a whole bunch of these face down creatures, and on top of that, blue and green historically are some of the best colors for morph from back in the day. Because blue has a lot of good utility morphs, green has the big punch you in the mouth morphs. And so, okay, you're going to have face down creatures a lot in these color combinations. Presumably, a lot of the disguised creatures from Archive, the Murders of Karlov Manor, rather, will be in these colors. So there might be some kind of shell to take advantage of that. It's kind of neat. And so, but you only get 1 every turn. So you can go down a card in your hand to create a 2/2 on the battlefield. Now you get control over what that is. So if it's a creature with a cool turn face up ability, all right, get it out here because maybe you can do stuff with that. Also, if you have a creature face down as a face down creature and you blink it with an effect like an Ephemerate or something like that, the card exiles and then it comes back in with none of the baggage that it carried when it was on the battlefield the first time around, meaning that it comes back in face up and untapped. So if you have, this is a way that you could cheat an Atrax onto the battlefield. Simply have Vannifar online, you cloak it, and then blink it. And all of a sudden you have an Atrax alive, you have an Atali live, whatever the case may be. That's neat. There are more efficient ways to cheat stuff onto the battlefield, but having that backup plan in some other strategy using those pieces could be fun. So I'm not mad at that. The idea of taking a card from your hand and just putting it face down on the battlefield with ward even is kind of weird. Like it feels odd. When I think of Cloak or Manifest, I always feel like it should be coming off of the deck. Or I should be able to like tutor for it or have it, I don't know, a card from the graveyard or something. I don't know. It coming out of the hand, it is such a direct loss of a resource by losing a card in your hand. You really need to want to put it down like that. That said, though, if you're already running Disguise and you were already planning on putting Disguise creatures face down, this gives you a free one every turn on your 4-drop. That's pretty cool. So, yeah, I like Vannifar, Evolved Enigma. I think that's kind of fun. Also, the way that the second option is worded, putting a +1/+1 counter on each colorless creature you control, that kind of opens up this idea that, well, what if I just built it with artifact creatures? What if I built a bunch of like those old school colorless Arcbound creatures alongside Vannifar and just went silly with it? Like, why not? You know, it's basically Steel Overseer at that point, and that ain't bad. Steel Overseer rules, so sure, let's do that. I don't know. I think Vannifar is an interesting design. It's just a good value engine. I think if you care about specifically colorless creatures, or you're putting face down cards on the battlefield anyway, this is going to be good. Also, I'm pretty sure if you cloak a card that has morph, like a Willbender or like a Krosan Colossus, you can still turn it face up for its morph cost. Just because it's disguised, you know, rather than being, you know, an otherwise face down creature. Because at the end of the day, a face down creature is a face down creature, whether it has ward or not. Face down and face up, or turned face up, that verbiage is compatible and consistent. So yeah, I mean, every morph deck that exists out there probably was in these colors anyway. You got a new tool, a new value engine that can, or a new value piece that can kind of help just keep things moving smoothly. And that's great. Those are all, that at the 4-drop slot is exactly what we want to see. So yeah, everybody, thank you so much for checking out this edition of the Spoiler Roundup. I appreciate it. These long-form videos are something that I don't do as often, just because I do a ton of long-form stuff over on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/hamhocks42. I'm over there playing casual games in competitive environments. That's right, I'm trying to take kind of that Commander mentality and bring it into standard and timeless, historic, you name it. I do brawl from time to time, but for the most part, I'm actually looking at the 60-card constructed formats, because that's where I started, and there's something just, I'll always be fond of it. So we're always trying to do janky brews and find the next fun things. If that sounds like fun, go drop a follow over there, and I'll catch you the next time I'm live. I'm doing it 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, in the mornings Eastern time. So I look forward to catching you there. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.